Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the day of our SITS Virtual Summit, which is sponsored by Freshworks. My name is David Maguire. I'm Event Director of SITS, just allowing some more people to join the session, which has just kicked off. So we're just seeing the numbers go up at the moment. So thank you to everyone who is joining us. Before we get going and I pass over to Rob, I just wanted to run through a couple of guidelines just in case you haven't already attended a session with us before. So firstly, don't worry if you miss anything at all from this session or any of the sessions across the 2 days. They'll all be available on our website to download by the end of the week. Also, we really want to encourage you to ask questions. I know Rob is keen to hear from you, so please use the Q&A functionality in the toolbar. I will then jump back on at the end of the session to pose your questions to Rob. Also, please feel free to stay social. We have our handle, which is sits_UK, and the hashtag Sits Virtual Summit. So please feel free to share what you're liking, learning, would like to see more of. It really helps us shape the next virtual summit. So I think that's enough from me. What I'll do now is pass over to Rob to kick off his presentation, and I will jump back on again at the end to ask your questions. Enjoy.
Thank you, David. Well, good day, and thank you for joining this presentation today about value stream management. Now, everyone nowadays is talking about value streams, right? The DevOps community talks about value streams in their software engineering pipelines, part of continuous delivery. IT for IT talked about value streams for the last few years. And ITIL 4 nowadays always also talks about value streams as part of your service value chain. However, most organizations still struggle to understand what are the key value streams I need in my digital delivery model. And in this presentation, I will show you the most important 9 value streams you should be implementing and optimizing in your own IT organization. Because I think that identifying the right value streams is probably one of the most important ingredients in your digital new operating model and also in your digital transformation. Now let's have a look at the agenda for today. This slide shows you what are the key questions I would like to address in this presentation. Now, first of all, I'm going to talk about what are value streams very briefly, and why do we need to focus on these end-to-end value streams. Then I'll zoom into what are the key capabilities you need in an IT organization or a digital organization that is basically underpinning all these value streams. And then we're going to zoom into what are the most important value streams you need and how are these enabled by those capabilities. And then lastly, we zoom into how you start working on implementing and optimizing these value streams in your own IT organization. And at the end, we have some time for questions. Now, this slide I use a lot because this provides me an overview of what's happening currently in my digital operating model. There's a lot of evolving changes the way we run IT the last 10 years. So it's not just about agile development and new release models, but you also see the architecture is changing with more micro-based, platform-based, component-based architecture. The organization model as we speak is also changing in a more team-based structure with autonomous teams working on products. Hosting and sourcing models are changing over time where we go to the cloud and work with different ways with our vendors in the ecosystem. But one of the key elements that I want to focus on today is that focus on the value streams, because value streams is also a new key ingredient of your digital operating model. So in the past, we were very much focused on processes. With ITIL, we focus on individual processes and you have individual process owners optimizing a process like incident management or problem or change management. And you see that ITIL with version 4 is now moving into practices instead of processes and to value streams. And there's a key reason for that. If you want to improve your IT operations and the way you deliver services, you're optimizing individual processes is not sufficient, like incident management, for example. It's really about optimizing an end-to-end value stream which combines multiple processes and practices together. For example, to resolve an incident, it's not just dependent on incident management. You need a good configuration management capability, as well as maybe monitoring and knowledge management and a self-service portal. But also, if you want to resolve incidents, potentially we need to automatically raise a request to resolve capacity, add capacity, those kind of things. So it's really about optimizing end-to-end value streams. So the question you should ask yourself is, how digital are my own IT management processes? Or how is work flowing end to end through my IT organization? And how do I enable my customers and support them? And as you could see, most organizations don't have a bigger picture of how everything is connected together. And this is just illustrating that we have complex processes in an organization underpinned by many different tools with a lot of different people involved and a lot of different practices. And what value stream management helps about thinking about is understand the end-to-end flow of how I support and generate value to my customer. For example, imagine a new idea is coming into the organization or a new demand, and it can be an internal demand coming through portfolio management or just from a customer directly. But how do we process these demands before we actually can take the decision to invest in this new product or service, for example? And it typically is many people are involved. It may be architecture involvement to look at the demand, looking at how does it fit in my portfolio. I need to work maybe with new vendors in my market. I need to assign a product owner. I need to get funding for this. Maybe risk and security needs to look at this. So it can typically take maybe even 3 months to explore this idea. And then before we actually starting to work on this demand, creating a team, setting up a backlog, they start developing, prototyping, and so on. So it's really important to understand what is all needed to translate a demand into something value for the customer, because that's very complex in many organizations. Think about, maybe we need to look at risk management from the vendor we select as well, or we need to have funding and budget as an example. And so it's a very complex end-to-end process. And the same, a trigger can be an incident or a complaint coming in, and we need to resolve that incident, which is not just taking care of the incident itself, but also we need to identify how can we identify the right team. So we need a configuration management database that could potentially help us. Maybe it's knowledge management. Then we have maybe a standard resolution to fix that question or issue through automation, for example. Or we want to be more proactive and we detect issues before the customer is affected, which is a different flow of work, because then monitoring will detect something and we automatically raise an alert, assign it to the right team, they investigate, or maybe even we can automatically resolve issues. So there are different journeys you need to optimize, and it's very important to define these end to end and understand how we can optimize these, because eventually it's really about how do we manage the value and outcome for the customers, how do we manage risk, as you could see here, the cost and the user experience. And this requires a different approach than we have done in the past, because if you look at this bigger picture, there are a lot of people involved in improving this end-to-end digital delivery model. We have different process owners, service managers involved, teams that develop maintain the CMDB or develop testing tools, monitoring. So it's this end-to-end chain is pretty complex, and it seems in many organizations that there's not really end-to-end one person or a few persons accountable for these end-to-end flows. So if you're starting to analyze your end-to-end flows of work through your service value chain, you typically detect a lot of symptoms of where something is going wrong. For example, a good example is always the CMDB seems to be not up to date. And this is a reason why the CMDB is not up to date. It's not about optimizing the CMDB and get a config team or discovery implemented. It's really about how do we make sure that the CMDB is updated based on deployment. So it's really about looking at the end-to-end value streams. And that's challenging because most organizations, they typically have a good overview of what's lacking. So if you ask different teams what needs to be improved, you get a picture like this. For example, we say we don't have insight in value delivered by projects. We don't have a good service portfolio. We do have a lot of manual deployment. Testing takes too long. We lack a good request catalog, or ordering infrastructure just takes too long for my team to get working. We don't have good monitoring in place so that we proactively detect issues, can resolve them. We don't have good self-service and self-help. And again, the CMDB is not up to date. And the challenge is that most organizations typically try to resolve this in isolation. So they have a project for CMDB or for monitoring. And that's where we need to think about this differently. We really need to look at the end-to-end value streams first before we can even improve the individual capabilities or processes. And that's really where this story is about, because you should ask yourself the following questions. And these are just example questions, right? But ask yourself why. Why do you think that configuration teams cannot maintain a CMDB? Because the CMDB cannot be maintained by config people. They cannot, because it should be maintained by the persons that actually deploy things or actually own the product. So config in isolation can never maintain a configuration database, and it should be done by the product teams themselves. As an example, why do you think SecOps cannot simply secure IT? Because security cannot manage security. It's a collective approach across the entire value stream. The same is service managers cannot agree and manage SLAs, because an SLA is underpinned by, can we even deliver this availability? Is the application designed for this performance and availability? So in it, again, managing as a service level objectives cannot be done by service managers. It can only be done by the collective of team designing services according to the SLA, as an example. It's really about an end-to-end chain. The same is why operations cannot monitor services. Why do you think monitoring is not very mature in most organizations? Because operations cannot monitor services, because monitoring should be developed by the product teams again. By during development, you instrument your application, you develop monitoring, and then you deploy your monitoring. It cannot be done as an afterthought by operations that think, let's start monitoring. The same as finance. Why can finance not manage your IT cost? Because finance doesn't have insight of the cost associated with a service or an application. They can manage cost, of course, but they cannot allocate it to the right service because they miss the insight. And the same is the why can architects not manage the architecture? Because there are so many people involved in modifying and creating architecture or components in the, let's say, the applications. So you really need to think differently about how we organize IT, because these are fundamental challenges we face today in many organizations. So the idea is that we focus on value streams. Now, most people have, of course, a good understanding of what a value stream is, but briefly, maybe highlighting a few areas here. So the value stream itself is, you could say, a sequence or a series of activities, steps that are value-added activities that create the overall result of outcome of our stakeholder. And stakeholders could be internal, external stakeholders, or a customer. But it's really about the value that you create based on specific demand or requirements. And each of these activities generate value. But it's also important to understand that these value delivery activities are underpinned by a set of capabilities. For example, I need monitoring capability to detect potential issues or events. And then I need maybe an event management capability or an incident management capability to actually make sense of those events and incidents. So it's really about the value stream itself, but it's underpinned by capabilities, your processes, your tools, the data. And that's where it is challenging, because a lot of processes and applications are underpinning multiple value streams. And I will show you later on why we typically don't improve our IT organizations. Well, because we try to improve the capabilities in isolation. So it's really about the end-to-end view, focusing on what do we need to make outcome and success for our stakeholders from an end-to-end perspective. And that is really challenging, because in most organizations, we don't have a person accountable for these end-to-end activities. Now, let's have a look at a value stream and a customer journey are also related. So we often talk nowadays about customer journeys. So you could say that a customer journey is typically relying on at least one value stream. But it could be also that there are multiple value streams involved for an end-to-end customer journey. Think about a customer journey that a new employee is onboarded in our organization. So the idea is that we make this as streamlined and easy as possible, that this new employee is fully onboarded in the organization, so has access to the right applications he needs or she needs, gets a laptop, mobile phone, security card, and so on, and email. So really the end-to-end journey is the customer journey, but it's underpinned by a number of value streams. In this example, the value stream is mainly related to request fulfillment value stream, like ordering services from a standard catalog, because these are standard catalog items, right? A person needs a user account, it needs an email address, it needs to have access to my business applications, it needs a laptop, mobile phone, and security badge. So these are value streams related to order to fulfill or request to fulfill. An end-to-end value stream from a standardized catalog, make a standard fulfillment, and make sure the end user can then consume these services. And as you could see, these value streams, like request to fulfill value stream, is enabled by capabilities. For example, we need a good catalog management component to make sure that we can catalog all these type of services we can provide. Request management, so people can start requesting this service through a portal maybe. Identity and access management, because we need to maintain identities, manage subscription and access. We need a good deployment capability, because if we want to deploy access rights or maybe deploy software rights to these persons, we need to automate these. And of course, config and license management is other examples. And as you could see, is that the focus on value stream is really about the end-to-end, underpinned and then on the top customer journey, and multiple capabilities need to be combined. And that's where the challenge is really in most organizations. And just let me show you as an illustration of one of the value streams is, for example, the ability that we can detect and resolve incidents before the customer is impacted. And to do this this end-to-end value stream of detect issues and resolve them, you need probably a monitoring capability. For example, the ability to detect issues, maybe it's about user experience monitoring from the end user perspective, or it's infrastructure monitoring or application performance monitoring. But we are collecting the data, analyzing this, and hopefully we can predict or at least prevent issues by early detection. And then we generate an alarm on our event. So then we need an event management capability to process all this data, impact assessment, because probably there's multiple events that we need to correlate, understand the impact. And that's where we need the CMDB again, the service models. How do we understand this component links to another component, or this component links to a business service? And of course, when we might need an incident capability to manage the incident and then assign it to the right team, look at maybe the knowledge base for standard resolutions and collaboration components, for example, MS Teams or Slack, that we communicate with the different stakeholders together to quickly resolve this issue. And there are many more capabilities you need for detect to correct. But conceptually, which is really about, it doesn't make sense to improve your monitoring capability in isolation, or monitor or improve your CMDB in isolation. It's really about how do these components all fit together to actually improve the way you can resolve incidents. So you cannot resolve incidents faster by only having a good incident management system. You cannot improve monitoring if just monitoring cannot integrate an event management system, and so on and so on. It's really about bringing that together into an end-to-end value stream. And that's what we're going to talk about today a little bit more detail, how to do that. But the key element in that is, so you need to think about who are my owners of these capabilities, right? Because it's also important to understand governance in your IT organization. So who is even accountable for monitoring or setting monitoring up? Who's accountable for the CMDB, for instance? So we have a number of capabilities, or you can call them product owners, capability owners, to actually maintain these kind of capabilities. But also need to think about who is then accountable to make sure that all these capabilities fits together in the right way to generate customer value, because monitoring doesn't generate value. Incident management by itself doesn't generate value. The CMDB doesn't generate value. It's about how do we connect everything together to make value. So then there needs to be somebody accountable to make sure that everything fits together in an end-to-end way. And these persons we can call the value stream owners. So it's really important in your own organization to think about who are those value stream owners, who is basically looking at the end-to-end picture, and make sure that the product owners or the capability owners are improving and doing the right thing. Now, let's have a look at what are the capabilities I need, because then I can zoom in later to all the essential value streams. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that managing your digital ecosystem is really challenging. Yeah, and you should not underestimate this. So most organizations will say, yeah, but it's very complex, my IT management, so I simplify a bit. But the reality is IT management is pretty complex. Huh? You could see that already in ITIL. We've got 34 different practices or processes in the past. We have a lot of processes there, like let's say 34. We got about 100 different tools to manage IT. Most organizations of a medium-sized company have over 100 different tools to manage IT. So it is much more complex than a lot of other IT domains. So IT management, and that's what we often call IT for IT, running your IT underpinning by the right process and tools is pretty complex. So you really need to think about this bigger picture. What is all needed and involved to manage my digital services from an end-to-end perspective? And that's, I can assure you, is not an easy task. But the only way to improve your IT organization is start with this bigger picture in mind and then look at the value streams and then starting to improve. So it doesn't make sense if your organization is now doing a seem to be project or replacing their IT service management system or implementing monitoring. I would say they're likely to fail because you cannot start implementing these in isolation. So first you need to look at the bigger picture and then start to say, how can we integrate monitoring with event and incident? How can I improve the seem to be quality by integrating that with deployment, for example? And it's really, that is the only way to implement these kind of capabilities. And it's not a surprise, of course, that most organizations don't have a good seem to be because you cannot implement a seem to be as an isolated capability, as an example, right? Now, as I mentioned, IT management is pretty complex, and this picture shows you a number of those technology components involved. But underpinning each of these tools, there's processes, data, and practices. And as you could see how demands may be captured in our portfolio backlog nowadays, traditionally we had a project portfolio management system or process, but now we call it the project portfolio backlog. We have architecture, we have our development teams working in Jira and Azure DevOps. We have document management system, source code, pipeline, code quality, build, test management, deployment, monitoring, various monitoring systems and capabilities out there like security monitoring, event management, our service management system, the seem to be, and so on and so on. And it's really about that these end-to-end components that are involved, or all the components involved, needs to be somehow related to each other to actually improve the user experience. So if you want to resolve an incident faster, it's not about an incident management system by itself, or if we want to make sure that we deliver continuously, it's not about the pipeline itself. And that's where the real challenge is about. It's really about the connecting all these different processes, the people, the teams, and the data, and also the tools together to make this end-to-end flow. And I'm not going to talk about tools today, but it's also a very complex tooling landscape because people typically like, and in IT we see that a lot. IT teams select their own tools and they like to implement their own tools. For example, maybe the security team has their own security tools, IT service management has their own tools, enterprise architecture. And those tools, they don't talk very well together. So nowadays you see there's a whole new category of tools coming across. It's called value stream management. How can we connect all these different tools together to make a sort of seamless flow of work through my IT organization? And it's not about the tools, but it's actually how can we create this flow of work and value through the IT organization and make it traceable and transparent. Now, so one of the key things we need to resolve in working in value streams is eliminate all those different bubbles, because in most organizations that I know of, they have a lot of bubbles. And what I mean by bubbles is by basically a team that tries to have it could be sometimes called a center of excellence, or it's a specific team looking at their own ways of working and their own practices. Like maybe you have a separate practice on project portfolio management, like the PMO, and they might use sprints and other practices. We have development and DevOps teams. DevOps sounds like end-to-end, but most DevOps teams, they don't look at the end-to-end. They only take a subset and they use Scrum and DevOps practices, maybe a skilled agile framework, but they have their own set of capabilities, their own tools even. And sometimes the DevOps teams, they don't want to use our service management system to manage incidents and changes. And of course, the service management capability area, they use ITIL, they have a service management system, C&B. The infrastructure operations team, they have their own practices, and now maybe they're starting to work with site reliability engineering. Security team has their own tools, their own practices. Like typically they select their own security monitoring system. And once events come in, they cannot even be related to the seem to be. They cannot even automatically create an incident in our service management system because they use their own tools, their own practices, and they're another silo. And maybe they use NIST as a practice there. Enterprise architecture, similarly, they work on their own systems and tools, and they might have TOGAF or Archimate as a model. And then you have the supporting bubbles like finance, contracting, risk management, and they might use different frameworks, COBIT, or for finance, we use technology business management. And it is still the reality in many organizations today is that each of these are implementing the components, the practices, the tools, and the data, but end to end, it doesn't work very well. Yeah, and as I mentioned, We deploy something in production through DevOps pipeline and the CMDB is not updated. Or we deploy something and we cannot monitor the service. Or we have licenses that we cannot account for, or we don't have insight in costs and so on and so on. And it's really about that we always optimize individual components instead of these end-to-end value streams. And so we need to break that silo approach. And I can assure you, DevOps is not the breaking of silos, right? Because the DevOps eliminated some of the silos, but in principle, not that much change, right? We still have other silos through DevOps, multiple teams working with their own tool sets, for example. So if you want to break the silos, we really need to think about these end-to-end value streams. So I will show you later what value streams do we actually need. Now, before I introduce the value streams, I would like to show you what are the key capabilities I need. And this is a picture from IT for IT, but I simplified it a bit, but it's also aligned with ITIL. So it's kind of combination of ITIL and IT for IT and DevOps. And the reason is I would like to show you what are the key building blocks I need to optimize and improve my end-to-end digital delivery model. And once we know these key building blocks, then I can overlay the value streams and starting to see what I need to do to improve end-to-end value streams. So we have the development part and the operations part. Let's say development, um, focusing on the portfolio backlog and developing, testing, and releasing new services. And ops, we are fulfilling all those standard requests and operate them. But it's underpinned by this, what I call the service and product backbone. It's really about what are the services we provide to our customers, who's consuming them, what are the versions out there, and who owns them, for example, what teams are associated with it. So it's really the everything we do in IT somehow needs to be based and related to this backbone of services and products. Now, uh, the business we have different interactions with our business. And of course, business and IT come together. So this business interface is still a kind of combination of business and IT together. But demands come in typically in the sense of strategic demands. For example, new business opportunities, new ideas. And we typically starting to group them into a capability called demand and portfolio management, let's say. So here we develop our strategy, our strategic direction, manage our demands and our portfolio backlog. And maybe this is project portfolio management, or this is more newer project portfolio backlog management, lean portfolio management, for example. So here we take the bigger decisions, getting funding organized. The second part of the work we do in IT is about once we have a set of services running or products, we have continuously maybe new feature or new requirements coming in. Maybe it's an enhancement request, for example, and they are developed, tested, and deployed. Once they are deployed, people can request access to those services. So we come into the service request because once something is delivered, maybe it's a business application running in production, then people need to be able to access it. And that's where we have the request from a catalog. We fulfill the request through automation. But it could also be, I want to order a new server or a new database. It's done through a catalog, it's fulfilled and deployed. And hopefully after something is fulfilled and deployed, we can monitor the services and then automatically raise incidents, or hopefully we can automatically remediate it. But it could also be that customers have a question or an issue and we can resolve them through self-help or self-service, or provide assistance through the service desk, for example. But everything we do here is related to that backbone again. Now, this is a very simplified model. The reality, of course, is that we have a few more components that we need in our IT organization. And my experience is if I use this picture and I can plot my current tools to this and my current basically processes to it, it helps a lot. This kind of is a key tool that I use in many organizations, and it works as a good communication vehicle. So in a sense that I can try to understand, okay, how do we manage our demands, portfolio management? How does that integrate with my backlog of the teams? But for example, product backlog nowadays, design and development, maybe they have Jira or Azure DevOps, while our portfolio management is still a traditional project management system, for example. So we need to think, how do we connect that all together? Or if you zoom into your service backbone, you have your enterprise architecture capability, your service portfolio, your CMDB, let's say, and it's all about how do we integrate these components together. And these components you see here are basically kind of building blocks, capabilities you need, underpinned by the right set of practices, could be ITIL, DevOps, Scrum, and the right set of tools. And then, of course, not to forget, we have some supporting areas we need to look into IT, like financial management, risk and compliance, HR, and contracting. Now, what's very important in any IT organization is the data. And data is probably the most important element in IT that is underestimated in most organizations, but it's essential to create this end-to-end value stream approach. And so let me illustrate a bit about what kind of data do we need in IT and how should everything be connected? Because having the data connected is a key element in value stream management. So as an example, again, we can have a demand coming in, and demand is registered in our portfolio management environment or a process. It's linked to strategic themes and goals because it needs to tie in to what is the strategy? What do we want to achieve? Can we make this traceable? And that results into a portfolio backlog item, or maybe some organization call it still a project. But it is important that we understand our demand and how that links into our architecture. For example, maybe there is a customer journey we want to improve. So for example, really about business products, right? A customer that wants to buy a new insurance product. Then we have these value streams and customer journeys, and these portfolio items try to say, this is what I want to improve. And every portfolio item is linked to one or more applications or services. And we might need to get some funding. So budget is allocated to the service instead of budget only is allocated to change. And then from a portfolio backlog, you go into the product team backlog. Maybe that's in Jira or Azure DevOps. And there you're starting to develop. You do have your pipeline, you do build, you do your testing. And that's where you have a new service or product release created, a new build of an application, like a new version. Or it could also be an infrastructure product, like a new standard hosting product or Linux, for example. And then once we deploy services, we try to link them into the deployment date object, the change that we register for this release, and we update the catalog so that people can request access or can deploy or request deployment of these services. And then once something is deployed in production, I update the CMDB, I look at the configured resources, I link my licenses to it, and hopefully I can start monitoring these components. So the idea is if you deploy something in production, you're immediately starting to monitor your services. And after monitoring, maybe there's an event coming is detected. So we create an event, and hopefully we can automatically remediate that through automation, for example, a runbook to react upon an event and starting to remediate before the customer is affected. And if not, we create an incident or a security incident, which is picked up by the security team or support teams in the incident problem process. And so I can continue, right? There's like maybe incidents reported through the self-service portal. And to resolve problems in production, we might need a feedback loop to the backlog in the teams again, so to fix them and create a new release. And as I mentioned, service requests come in or new feature requests come in. And lastly, the whole supporting capabilities. We also need to manage risk cost. We need to understand the teams and persons persons involved in the delivery and the contracts and the vendors. Now, I understand this is a quick overlay of data, but it's important to understand is that you need to start working on standardizing this data across the different systems, because each of these different tools you have in your organization is enabling part of these capabilities with different data models. So it's really about how do I create this end-to-end traceability? And that's where the value stream approach will come along as well, which I will explain you now in more detail. Now, before we zoom into the essential value streams, I would like to show you what most organizations are currently doing. So maybe organizations have a picture like this and they know exactly what they want to improve. So typically how most organizations work today is they say, okay, we have a problem with our service portfolio backlog. So we're going to invest in this and starting to improve it. So there is a separate initiative for portfolio management. Of course, we want to implement portfolio backlog in a more agile way. So we start to invest in a capability to do portfolio backlog management. We want to improve in the CI/CD pipeline. So we're starting with a small initiative and implementing CI/CD pipeline. We want to improve our test automation. So we start investing in test automation. And probably your organization, if you listen to this, you're all doing this. You're all investing in these capabilities, like release and deployment automation. You probably have an initiative there. Maybe you want to do enterprise service management. We want to extend our digital experience to other domains like facility management. And of course, as I mentioned, the CMDB, we need to fix the CMDB because it's never been up to date. So we start an initiative there, and I can continue there. So there's so many initiatives that people are working on. Security monitoring. We need to improve our security event management by and orchestrate an automation. Uh, Site reliability engineering, maybe the self-service, self-help. Of course, we need to improve. Oh yeah, we need to manage cost management. So there's an initiative. We move to the cloud, so we need to implement cloud management, and we need to improve our reporting capabilities because we have a lot of reporting already in place, but we still have not the insight that we actually need. So can we solve that? Now, what I wanted to say with this is that you probably have all these initiatives currently in your IT organization running at the same time. So they're probably, and even you might not know it, they're all working on it. I can assure you, all these initiatives are happening as we speak in your IT organization. We're implementing, introducing new tools or tweaking tools, implementing new practices. But I can assure you, if you take this approach like we just did, it will not result in too much value. It will probably even fail. So it doesn't make sense to start with all these initiatives and think that then my IT organization is much more mature, because that's probably not the case. What we need to do, and then we come to the value streams, we need to first look at these end-to-end journeys and value streams. Like I mentioned initially, like there is like a new demand coming in. And how does that flow through the entire IT function, or call it the digital operating model, together with the business to generate value? How is this end-to-end flow even working today? And of course there's more, because maybe there we have an incident, but to resolve this incident is not just having an incident management capability. We might need to add capacity because we have a performance issue, or maybe we reboot a server, or we want to modify a parameter. So we need to go back to the request to fulfill, fix it, and then the incident is resolved. So the only way to start working, improving your organization, is to think about these value streams first, and then look at what do you actually need to improve the capabilities. So what I want to do now is take you through the 9 most important essential value streams you need to start optimizing your own IT organization. And hopefully you can use that in your own organization to take them one by one, analyze how people are working, and see if you can start improving these. Now, so let me start with the first one. This is the number one. And I guess we already touched upon that. That's the whole idea to market. So there is a new demand initiated, and we know that we want to invest in this. So we start getting the funding, we get the teams involved. Maybe we negotiate with our vendors, because we still have to select maybe a vendor product or maybe SaaS. And then we're starting to develop, test, and deploy it and make it available. This is the end-to-end flow. So introducing basically a new service. This is service introduction value stream. And the service introduction value stream is mainly challenging in the initial part, because it takes a lot of time to think about the target architecture, that maybe we need to have a new vendor onboarded, what are the technologies we're going to use, where is it going to be hosted, how do we go to the cost modeling, how do we organize the budget, who's even owning this service. So that's a different kind of a area than, for example, the next value stream is about if idea to market is too big, you have a shorter value stream, which is called the exploration. So we explore a new opportunity. And this is a value stream that organizations nowadays more and more use for innovation. So imagine there's a new opportunity identified for the business for a new service. But because we don't know yet how successful this is, we do an exploration. We kind of create like a lean startup model. We create a kind of prototype, or maybe we test somewhere with the business, and it's more explore a new service or product. So in this way, it's like a smaller value stream, because we only maybe look at who's going to lead this initiative. Maybe we have a candidate product owner, but we don't need to have maybe a final selection of the vendors, the contract license. We just make sure that the business capability can be implemented. So it's like exploring. This exploration is kind of your innovation value stream. And it really requires a different approach, and potentially it leverages a number of same capabilities as you see here, but it takes a different approach and a way we do this. Now, once we have those, the third value stream is about once a specific service or application is running in production, and maybe it's just release 1.0, we're starting to continuously improve them, which is really about the continuous delivery value stream. This is different than the idea to market because in a continuous delivery value stream, we assume there is already a product owner, there is a team established, they have a backlog, and they have basically everything in place to start receiving new features. So a new feature or demand requirements come in. It could be a new uh, regulatory requirement coming in, or a new feature or enhancement request, or could also be technology debt issues, right? But it's all about make sure that these are directly routed to the right team. They fix it, they can add the value, and we have additional value for this release. The fourth value stream that you need to optimize is about request to fulfill. It's really about standardizing all those repetitive requests in your IT organization. So it's having a catalog where we have those standard set of services. We can automatically request them through self-help or self-service. It's approved, maybe automated or manual, then it's fulfilled. Hopefully we can fulfill a lot of these requests in an automated fashion. Now, this is a value stream that most organizations are not very mature in. Of course, they have various request management capabilities out there, but typically it's fragmented. Maybe for the end user computing, Office IT, you have a number of requests, but for the application, you go to another portal. So typically multiple portals to request services, typically manually provisioned. But what's also lacking is once we provision a request or fulfill a request, we don't update the CMDB automatically. So it's not really a full end-to-end value stream, and the user experience is typically not as good. So in this value stream, it's really about combining the catalog, request, automated provisioning, the CMDB, as service level management, collaboration tools, all together in an end-to-end fashion. Now, the next value stream is about basically resolving customer reported issues. So an end user maybe detects something and he wants to resolve it through self-help, or maybe through assisted support. Maybe it's a virtual assistant, or maybe it's supported through the service desk. But it's about the whole flow that triggers by the consumer, and hopefully it can have different channels to communicate with IT. Maybe through self-help or self-service it can resolve issues, or maybe it can see, oh, it's already an outstanding issue, so I say that I have also the same issue, but I don't need to talk to somebody, I'll just wait until it's resolved. So it's really about the end-to-end flow of reporting through resolution. And also, this is a very complex value stream that most organizations are not very good in the sense of that I have a simple way to end for end users to report their issue, but also link it to the right service, because we need to be service aware. How many organizations have a service aware service portal that if I'm as an end user logging in, I get my services and I can select, okay, what service that you have an issue with, or I can see all the services that have currently an issue. So it's really about how do I make it simpler for the business and consumers to understand what's going on in my services, and can I easily report issues or get answers to questions. Now, the following value stream is about uh, things that we detect. So this is about detecting issues and trying to resolve them in an automated fashion. This is about your automated remediation, but it doesn't have to be fully automated as long as we can detect issues proactively, or at least detect issues when they are happening so that we can assign, alert people, they take action and resolve the issue. It could be a security incident or an event. And this end-to-end value stream is also in most organizations not that mature. So we need a mature monitoring capability. But monitoring needs context in the CMDB, understand which servers and databases are connected to my application so I know the impact. I need to understand the teams involved in my support so I can automatically assign things to the right team. But to fix an event or an incident in this case, I typically need to do something. And doing something, it means I'm maybe adding capacity, maybe restarting something, and that's back to request to fulfill. I need to automatically or standardize ways to resolving issues. Because what's important nowadays is that operations should not modify anything in production. They should not modify parameters. They should not do anything there. They should always go through or a request process to do something. Maybe it's automated, like restarting a server. Those kind of things we need to integrate and resolve in an end-to-end fashion. So this is monitoring, incident management, knowledge management, CMDB, automation for recovery. The next value stream is about resolving problems. And resolving a problem or a vulnerability is something else than resolving an incident. Because in this case, in this example, I mean, we have something that we need to resolve, and maybe it's a proactive problem or a problem that we identified based on recurring incidents, but we need a permanent fix. And for example, a vulnerability is a similar thing. We have a vulnerability, but we need to fix that. And to do that, we typically need to go back to the product teams or the service owners, go to their backlog, they develop and test and deploy the release or the fix. So they make a fix, deploy the fix, and make sure the problem is resolved. If you look at this value stream, it's really about problem management capability, knowledge management. It's about monitoring, getting the right data to detect problems even config management to understand where's the root cause, but also you need a good backlog development and testing capability, and again deployment capability to deploy the fixes for the problems. Now this is a challenging end-to-end value stream as well. That's why most organizations are not that mature in problem management, because they think they can run problem management with a problem manager role in the organization that's sitting in ops. That cannot be the case, right? Problem management, as you can see here, is probably more a ownership for the product and team that needs to do this. And then the last few value streams, one is the other, this number 8 is about continuous compliance. It's really about monitor your compliance of your services, whether it's infrastructure compliance like technology debt, or it's about the usage of this, or risk and compliance related questions such as data privacy, for example. But we need to be able to continuously monitor the compliance, collect the data, identify issues and resolve them, which is basically the value stream of continuous compliance. And continuous compliance is really about detecting potential issues and then resolving them. And that is not correctly depicted here, by the way, but because that typically needs tight integration with your value streams here above. Like to resolve a compliance issue, we need goes to back to the team, they develop and deploy that again. And the last value stream that I want to share with you is the consumption and usage to show back. This is really about being more insight into usage and cost. So this value stream is about measuring the usage of a service and doing the show back to the customer, but also do the consumption and cost allocation if needed. So it doesn't have to be charge back, but it's a kind of show back. This is a value stream that most organizations not very mature in either, because they don't manage usage and consumption very well. They cannot associate it with the service, and they cannot do the show back. But this is very important in a cloud model or any consumption model nowadays, that you can turn off things if they're not used, but you can also monitor whether they're actually used, because value is only generated when services are being used or features are being used. So these are the 9 value streams I have 9 identified as the key elements for your digital operating model. And what is really important is that to understand, to build these end-to-end value streams, you probably need different practices, because as you could see, it's overlaying a capability. So it's maybe safe you use for the portfolio backlog management. You use Toga for architecture. You have Scrum, you have DevOps, you have ITIL, you have maybe site reliability engineering. So typically you need multiple practices in an organization to really make this end-to-end work. So it is not about ITIL or DevOps, but it's and. So combining it in a clever way, take a right set of practices. For example, if we use development, we typically, the developers, they don't use ITIL as a framework for developing and testing. They use maybe Scrum and DevOps. So you need to use those and plot them to your value streams. So what practices I'm going to use for what kind of purpose? For example, site reliability engineering nowadays is a key practice that people are starting to use, for example, to make sure that during development, deployment automation and monitoring is enabled, because that's what we need to make sure that everything that's developed can be monitored, and so that our monitoring capability is updated through releases as well. And as you can imagine, this is not a simple task, because it's not about implementing these practices, right? It's not a goal by itself, but it's really about how do I create these end-to-end value streams and optimize these. And I typically need to leverage different practices. And that's another challenge, because most of the time we have specialists in the IT organization only knowing a specific practice. Maybe it's only SAFe, DevOps, ITIL, and IT for IT that hopefully brings them all together. And basically what we need is a collaborative approach of optimizing your value streams and working together with the different teams. Now, just to give you an example about that value stream and what are the challenges we face as an illustration. So one of the value streams we identified is actually resolve a problem like a vulnerability. The reality in many organizations is, if you want to resolve a problem, and we take a vulnerability as an example. So we have a monitoring system, let's say security monitoring. Security monitoring detects vulnerabilities, and they're just created in a vulnerability report. And that's most organizations stops there. It has a nice report showing all the red flags and say, hey, there's something wrong. Folks typically relate to a server. But what's missing is typically, how do we know which server belongs to which application, which team, which typically a CMDB will provide. But security is not integrated with the CMDB at all. But also this vulnerability report shows maybe 100 items, but I cannot trace a report. So we lack a capability to manage our vulnerability incidents, because these incidents are typically not stored in an IT service management system, but it could be, but it's manually copied and so on. But then once it's there in maybe even a service management system, we manage this vulnerability issue. To fix this vulnerability issue, we need to send it to the right teams. But those teams, they sit in Jira, for example, or in Azure DevOps. And the only way to get them working on this and make a new fix is to make sure it's added to the backlog and it's linked, so that we can know this vulnerability incident is linked to this story, it's built, tested, and then it's deployed. Once it's deployed, we make sure we update the CMDB. Well, in most organizations, we don't do that. And then we could resolve the vulnerability, and hopefully the scanning tool will then check and say, yeah, it's resolved. And this is an example of an end-to-end flow. The reality is, of course, it's much more complex than this, but it's really important to sit with the stakeholders involved in this value stream. Security in this case, service management, development, deployment, monitoring, and see how can we resolve this, because it doesn't make sense to say, let's build a security monitoring improvement. It's really about how do we resolve vulnerabilities faster and better. And that's where you really need to co-create it with a lot of stakeholders in your organization. And one of the things you can then do is, for example, in this example of resolving an event through monitoring, and what are the capabilities I need? And I plot this on a picture of ITIL 4 as an example, just to illustrate a bit, so that in this example, to resolve incidents through monitoring, you typically have different capabilities or practices you need to implement. So incident management, of course, monitoring, you need a good service configuration, you need maybe to fix an issue, you need a request and then deploy them. And infrastructure, the infrastructure teams are involved and application teams are involved, and knowledge management. So you see there's multiple practices from ITIL you can or you need in these value streams. So this is one of the steps you need to go through. For each of those 9 value streams, you try to plot what are the practices I need, what are the tools I need, and what are the data elements that I need. So closing down a bit for this presentation is about the last step is about that governance still, right? So we have 9 value streams, but what's really important is how do we organize ourselves around this? Because identifying a value stream is not sufficient. We need to manage a value stream. So for example, we need to identify value stream owners who will do the oversight of these end-to-end value streams. What architects are involved, because you need a good architecture community to look across all the different processes and tools and data involved in the value stream. You need to identify your capability and product owners. Maybe there's a product owner for IT service management, for monitoring, for security, for the agile development. And then you need to work with all the product teams involved, and the product teams, I mean here, all the teams that actually maintain some of these components in your landscape, like a team that maintains the monitoring environment, like Splunk, the team that maintains your service management system, like ServiceNow, the team that maintains your Jira or your CI/CD pipeline or your catalog. Those kind of teams you need to work with. And if you bring those people together and then starting to analyze your current flow, and that way you can actually starting to improve your IT organization. So summarizing, what we should not do is this, and this is what we typically do today. We throw in additional capabilities in IT. This is, by the way, how most organizations try to mature their IT organization. So we throw in monitoring, CMDB improvement projects, self-service, virtual assistant, security monitoring, CI/CD pipeline, and so on. We throw all these capabilities in, but actually you could see maturity is not improving in your IT organization. So what we should do is focusing on the value streams, and then select the right capability blocks that you need, because a lot of these capabilities are shared across multiple value streams. Make sure you implement the right capabilities with the right set of tools and data to make them a really an integrated digital delivery chain, because then you can optimize your value streams that flow across these capabilities. So this is my final slide on this topic. So what we need to do is create a value stream network. And you have to identify key value streams in your IT organization. If you don't do that, I can assure you, your IT organization will not mature. So we need to define the ownership and governance around this, because we organize around these value streams and we're starting to improve around these. And we need to build a good capability model, as I showed you as an example, using IT for IT together with DevOps and ITIL. And then focus on how do we get this end-to-end traceability, because I forgot to say, this is actually not something you implement at day one. This is about a continuous improvement journey. So you started to identify the value streams and then continuously improve them while you go. So that's at the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening to this presentation. And I really hope that you liked the presentation. I understand there's a lot of material to process, but you can always watch it back later. And I believe that if you can apply it in your own organization, it will really give you a lot of benefits. If you want more information, please feel free to contact me. My details are shown here below. And of course, I wish you a good digital journey yourself. Thank you very much. And then
Thank-
I guess I hand over to David if there's
Yeah.
still time for questions.
Yeah, we've got some time. We've got about 5 minutes. I was just going to say, though, thank you so much for that presentation. There was so much content in there in an amazing way, and people are really, really engaged and asking for copies of the slides and to get in touch with you. So I'm sure there'll be some great follow-up from this session. But I'll jump into a few questions that people posed early on. So are value streams something repetitive, or value stream can be something unique, explorative type activity, i.e. brainstorming, communication?
Yeah, I guess the example, what I've done is these are defined 9, let's call them template value streams, because even if you have a value stream like request to fulfill, you could have different flavors. Like for end user computing, it might be slightly different than for infrastructure. So these are kind of a thinking of value streams. But you could have value streams indeed that are more informal. For example, the exploration value stream I was talking about, right? So, and maybe you don't need to formalize is that as much as we just discussed. But for example, how do we explore new opportunities to improve our IT organization? And it still would be good to think about how is that done in our organization from, let's say, an opportunity to decision. And maybe it's not as formal, supported by tools, but it's probably good to formalize this so that you can starting to optimize, because that's what it is, right? Can we learn every time we do this, let's say, work and improve it? So in that sense, if you want to continue to learn and improve, you need to formalize a bit about how you measure things and starting to think what value looks like. So it's not as free format in that sense, right?
Okay.
As long as you make it measurable,
Yes.
then it's okay, right?
Brilliant. Thank you. Then we've got nice to see those 9 new value streams. How do you call the 4 blocks, like strategy to portfolio? I thought they were
Yeah,
value stream as well. What's your view on?
yeah, it's a good question. Those 4 blocks are currently also called value streams often, and they are by itself value streams as well. Like strategy to portfolio was the first block. It's really about how you translate your strategy into a portfolio set of products, which is, but it is challenging that some organizations say, is that value delivery or not? But you're right, the 4 values, the 4 blocks are almost like value streams as well. Currently in IT, those are also called value streams. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And then Ahmed's just said, very nice presentation as usual. My question, how to avoid isolation of the IT for IT team from the rest of the organization,
Yeah.
actual consumers of the value proposition?
Yeah, I understand that question because that's challenging. And maybe my interpretation of the question is an IT for IT team. What we mean by that is basically because if we organize these value streams and think about all the value streams together, maybe you create a team, call it an IT for IT team that actually maintains the tools and processes to make this end-to-end the IT for IT work. So they maintain the DevOps tool chain, for example, and monitoring. That's the IT for IT team, let's say. Now the challenge is indeed that they decide what does good look like, right? So actually the consumers of these are, let's say, the DevOps teams themselves, because they consume the service management team secure. So you need to create a governance model with these stakeholders in mind, because you need to work with your customers, let's say the DevOps teams, because what the DevOps teams want is enable them in their journey, and they need the right set of tools. So the actual consumers, it's like any other product management team, is they need to work with the consumers to understand their requirements and work together. I think it's a co-create with the consumer. So it's like a go and see, what they call the Gemba walk in Toyota. I think it's like you go and see how are the teams currently working, and then IT for IT says maybe we can help you automate this and support you in that. So it's really a co-create with the teams, with your customers and consumers in this case. Yeah, because they are typically in IT as well, those consumers, the DevOps teams, let's say. Yeah.
Okay. And I think an old mate of yours as he's described it, Dave Faville, has
Yeah.
just asked, do IT for IT, ITIL 4 and SAFE share a common taxonomy and metrics?
Yeah, unfortunately, at this moment, it's not the case, but David knows this already, of course. But he's well aware of all these concepts. But you're right, or the question is actually very good. That IT for IT and ITIL for Safe still have different terminology, but I see it they're merging to each other now. You see, with IT for IT version 3, they're using a similar concept as Safe with the portfolio backlog. ITIL 4 there's a lot of terminology aligned, like the value streams nowadays, but also key constructs. So there's more and more alignment. I see that happening now, indeed, but we're far away from a common taxonomy in IT. And it's actually a more important question than we think of, because it's about really, do we have a standard way of talking about, for example, data taxonomy in our IT organization? Like, we call this an incident or a change or a request or an epic story feature. There's different flavors. And the other is metrics, as David was asking, metrics. There are like proposed metrics from DevOps, like the ability, like to deliver on time or frequently deliver releases and release success rates. But I think we still lack a lot of those common metrics in the IT industry. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because that's one of the next steps I would like to focus on. Each of these 9 value streams have their own set of common metrics you would like to measure, yeah, to improve. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's still some more questions, but unfortunately we're going to
Yeah.
run out of time. But just to everyone who's still on the session, if I didn't manage to read out your question, we will pass these over to Rob so he can look at them and hopefully can come back to you directly. As someone said, there's so much content on your slides and people are really, really engaged. So Rob, you can find him. He's got his email address up on there, so feel free to get in contact directly with Rob and we'll try and put you guys in touch as well. But thank you so much, everyone, for staying on. That was a full packed hour. So brilliant, Rob. Thank you so much. And like I say, we'll pass over people's further questions. But next session's at 2 o'clock. So you can still register, check out everything that we've got going on our website. Everything is free. All the webinars are free. So go to our website to check out those. But have a good lunch, everyone. Thank you, Rob, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you as well, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.